Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Wolok, my partner in crime, is always back for another episode, my friend, Vasili Gianarakos. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Oh, doing good, Yariv. Excited to be back for this episode. We have a great guest. Things have cooled off a little bit hockey-wise, at least in terms of the NHL. Some really great Olympic hockey, though, going on. So that's always fun. But we're going to really get into, some Flyers topics that were pretty big deals, I would say, before the end of the break. And it'll be great to, pick our guest's brain. But I'll let you cue up the guest here because it's, somebody that's obviously amazing just in terms of Flyers insights and things like that. So
Yeah. So Vasili alluded to it. Today's episode will have Bill Meltzer on. We're going to have him on in a few minutes. We're excited to have him on. Thought he would be like the perfect guy to have on with all of the chaos and negativity, I guess, swirling around the team. He is always a voice of reason. And fits perfectly in with the tone of this podcast. So we're excited to have him on. We'll dig into him in a little bit, and all things Flyers. Again, I told people, when I recorded last week that it's going to be some rehashed topics this week, but this time with the insight of Bill Meltzer, so not just, and obviously Vasili back on the show. So it won't just be my opinion. So we'll hear what Bill has to say on those topics. Before we get into it, just want to remind everybody to please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for notification. Get notified when we release these episodes. And for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes and give us a rating and a follow as well. That is the best way to support this show. If you haven't done that, this is your first time listening or you're returning listening, please do so now. We humbly appreciate it if you could help us grow those numbers and help grow this show. Also, shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. Make sure to check out Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Get yourself a cheesesteak. Also, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for your insurance adjustment needs. They will help facilitate the process between you and your insurance company and make sure you get the best claim possible. Again, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. And also want to give a brief shout out to our partner, sportspider.com. Guys, if you're tired of searching multiple websites for sports news, sportspider.com has you covered. They collect the latest articles, videos, and podcasts from around the web and organize them by your favorite teams. If you want to stay as up to date on our Philadelphia Flyers or the NHL in general, make sure to hit the link in the description to check out sportspider.com. It's both in the link of the audio and video versions of this podcast. And obviously, you can just go to sportspider.com. And always make sure to check out FlyersNittyGritty.com. All right, we'll step into the episode and get right into our conversation with Bill Meltzer. All right, from the Flyers alumni, and hockey hot stove, Philadelphia famous, Bill Meltzer. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining Vasili and I.
Always a pleasure, guys. No problem.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on. I recorded by myself last week, and I told people that I'm pretty much going to rehash that show, but this time with other people's opinions, not just mine. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We were talking a little bit offline, and Vasili and I have been talking about this in general. Just, it's been a pretty crazy month or so. So, your perspective is always welcome. You just approach everything with so much rationality that I think we need a little bit of that. And I think this is kind of the perfect time. We take a breath and kind of just like, let's look at things in a realistic perspective as opposed to, the extremes. And it doesn't really do anybody any good to live that way. So I guess let's get into it initially and let's get back. So the Flyers obviously were doing very well by the expectations, right? They were a competitive team. They were a playoff team. What do you think kind of set them off the rails? Because we did see it coming. It kind of happened in slow motion a little bit. Like you saw hints of it. And then, I kind of called like quicksand, right? It just kind of like they fell into it and they just kept falling into it. It seems like they rallied a little bit so far. But what do you think kind of set this off? Because it did seem like while they weren't playing amazing hockey, they were at least very competitive in every game. And it's something we saw under Tortorella as well. And then we also saw it fall off a cliff with Tortorella at some point. What do you think kind of sparked all of this and got us to where we are right now, where they sit in the bottom 1/3 of the league?
I think the number one thing, go through those first 41, 42 games, first half of the season, right? They only lose back-to-back games in regulation once. Well, how did they do that? Even though they weren't a consistent scoring team, how were they staying competitive? The biggest way they were staying competitive, they had a very good structure going, right? Of course, they give up their fair share of high-quality chances, that kind of thing, and you expect that, right? But the goalies knew where the shots were coming from. The biggest thing to me that fell apart was structurally, where all of a sudden they're giving up all these backdoor goals, and that tells you that the structure is falling apart on the team. And when that fell apart, and then of course the power play has been a struggle for years. The penalty kill was a really positive point over the first half of the season, and they had a little rut here and there, but really through Thanksgiving to the beginning of January, it was up in the top 4 or 5 in the league, and then the PK went too. So if your structure is falling apart and your PK goes, and your power play hasn't been really very good all year for multiple years, that's where you're going to start struggling. I thought through January 6th, the game against Anaheim, they were in pretty good shape, actually, not just mathematically, but just the way they were playing was pretty good. Even to me, the turnaround, oddly enough, it was a former Flyer, right? It was that game against Toronto. Not the one play, because it's never just one play, but that game against Toronto at home, where they have a 1-0 lead, third period, they have a 5-on-3 power play. So you have a great opportunity to put a stranglehold on the game. They don't score 5-on-3. It goes to 5-on-4, and Scotty Lawton scores the shorthanded goal, and then you lose in overtime, right? And then they had the back-to-back games where they just got hammered by Tampa Bay, and that opened the floodgates where everything was going wrong. What I thought was very odd, I think everybody thought was odd, was they go in that Western road trip. They win a game in Vegas. Konechny scores 2 breakaway goals in that game, and 2 breakaway unassisted goals at that. Puts them on their back. They win that game. Next game after that, games in hand, right? They found a way. They found a way to lose that one. They lose in overtime, but come on, and it wasn't just the empty net that Hathaway missed. But it was really just the culmination of not managing the latter part of that game very well. They took a bad penalty, give up a power play goal. Then that happens with you have the pretty much gimme empty net goal. And why did Hathaway lose the puck on that play, right? He lost the puck on that play because he really slowed down. And you could just see the wheels turning. What he's thinking in his head is, don't miss, don't miss, don't miss, right? So he slowed down, got closer, and he got caught on the back check, and he loses the puck. And they didn't score right away. They scored about 20, 25 seconds later. But if you score that empty net goal, or you just shoot it when you're inside the blue line, then it's over, right? just guide it into the net. But he was so conscious. He had 1 point in the season, and just don't miss. And just emblematic of what was going on with the team. But then you go into Colorado, you get a great game in net. A bunch of guys stand up in that game. You actually have one of your biggest wins of the season. You're very okay. You know what? You got 4 out of a possible 5 points at a really tough road trip, and then they come home and they fall down again. That's kind of been the way it's gone. Now they've had injury issues, right? They were without Vladar for a while. And then Urson gets hurt yet again. Of course, Urson has been so inconsistent this whole season. So it's not just one cause, but it's a combination of factors. When you really look at well, I'm looking for the right word. When you're looking for the power base in the league, right? To me, there's a small gap in the middle, right, between the teams that are on the outer edge or going to miss the playoffs and the teams that get in as a wild card team or whatever. And you can look at a team like Buffalo, right?
Yeah.
Buffalo was at the bottom of the league. They just changed general managers. They missed the playoffs 14 years in a row. They changed GMs, not personnel. Then all of a sudden they get scorching hot with the same personnel that they were at the bottom of the league with. Not a coaching change, not a big trade, not anything. And you look around the league too, where a lot of teams that are now in the playoffs had 7-game, 8-game losing streaks or 1 win in 11 games. The Flyers weren't the only team that did that. But what the Flyers weren't able to do and haven't been able to do is, even though they weren't putting together losing streaks, they weren't putting together really long winning streaks either. That whereas other teams have had that stretch where they win 5 or 6 in a row or points in 8 of 10 games, that kind of thing. Flyers haven't really done that. I mean, we focused on the lack of the back-to-back losses. So that's really kind of where things have fallen apart. And then when they had an opportunity to get back into it, picking up 1 point instead of 2. That's kind of how they went into the break doing that. That game against LA, that's a game they should have had 2 points from, could have had 2 points in the final game. So now they're looking at a situation where they're 8 points out of a playoff spot, 9 points when you figure in the tiebreakers, that winning all those games in shootout early in the season when you need regulation wins. And you can also only play comeback hockey so many times, right? Flyers had so many games where they'd fall behind, come back, find a way to win. Eventually that's going to catch up with you. And the deeper you get into the season, the harder it gets to chase games successfully. So I think you combine all those factors and they are where they are.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is where I've been struggling with, because Vasili and I talked in the beginning of the season. We set up the expectations like relatively properly. We both were kind of around, hey, the Flyers will probably be relatively competitive bubble team, but ultimately we will probably miss the playoffs. That's how we kind of walked into this season. It seems like that's essentially where they're at. The one thing I struggle with the most, though, is, and maybe it's just the online thing, because we were talking about this, right? Like we all have to kind of spend a little less time online. It's just, it can be stressful out there. But how does this invalidate the good things that have happened this season? Because that's what it kind of felt like, right? Like they did go on this streak. It's understandable to be frustrated and, to be upset. And that is all very reasonable, right? Like nobody expects you to be happy or stay silent that the team is losing. It's uncomfortable for everybody. But it just feels like there's been this invalidation that everything they've done right, everything that Tocchet has done well this year, he hasn't been perfect, but it just seems like that was all thrown out the window. Like, no, none of that actually happened. There's, I would argue, a small contingency, but a pretty loud contingency of people saying like they need to fire him before he even finishes year 1 of 5. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. Well, like there is time to fire a coach, but the guy didn't even finish a season yet. What do you think about that? Like the invalidation, do you think any of it is fair, or do you think like, hey, no, like it was legit what they were doing. It just kind of fell off the rails, like you were saying. Like it was a tenuous, great record to begin with, and let's say great because they had the 6th best winning percentage at one point. But, overall, it's like, no, this is like generally average, not chaos.
No, precisely. And you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't complain endlessly. There's not enough talent on this team, and then say, "Oh, it's the coach's fault because he's not getting the most out of his players there." When he's actually keeping you competitive for more than half a season with what you're saying is, inadequate talent on the team,
right?
So I get the frustration. I really do. I live it every day, right? And it's been since 2018. Because of the pandemic, since the Flyers hosted a home playoff game, covered it against the Penguins, Game 6, right? That game where the Flyers blew a lead, a multi-goal lead, Couturier had a hat trick, I think a 5-point game in a losing cause, playing on a bad knee, all the rest of that.
Torn MCL, I think, for him, right?
Torn MCL, yeah. And it hurts, right? It stings. So I get it. And you're tired of being told to be patient, be patient,
Right.
be patient. That has a limitation to it. So I get all of that, right? I think that social media in general is just a really toxic place. People hiding behind anonymity become much braver than they would be if they were sitting in the room.
100%. Yeah.
And the other part of it too, and I'm kind of stealing Chris Tarian's thunder here a little bit, but there's something that he calls the hockey smark in pro wrestling, right? People that follow the business online and they go from the newsletters and whatever, and they think that they have a certain level of information beyond what the average fan has. So they think they're part of the inside the industry, and they're not. Okay, there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that are involved in the job of a general manager, of a coach, relationships within the locker room.
Tons of conversations between people you would never ever see, right? So
correct. And I'm on the periphery of the team. I mean, I'm a team reporter on the website, so I have a certain level of access,
Sure,
and a certain amount of access to privileged information that's given on the basis that, hey, that's not public, okay? But there's plenty that I don't get, and that's the way it should be. I mean, I believe.
Totally agree.
I'm always a believer that certain things stay in the room or behind closed doors, and what happens when some of those things become public? Again, it's a catch-22 though. Like the whole thing with Tocchet and Michkov, the comments that he made on Carnival weekend, and the game before that too. I will tell you that I didn't know about the whole thing about skipping treatments and whatever. That did not get to me. That did not get to any of the broadcasters for the team. Tocchet just volunteered that. So we want to have candor, but then we also want to say, well, why'd you keep that behind closed doors, right? So it's Tocchet made some mistakes, no question, and he's not a perfect coach. There's never been a coach, even coaches that I like, admire, respect, who I've agreed with 100% of the time on all things. And with Tocchet, I have to personally separate the sentimental side from the objective side because I grew up a Flyers fan.
A fan, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. And those 80s teams were the teams of my heart. Those are the teams I grew up with and started to understand hockey with, lived and died with the Mike Keenan era teams as a teenager. So love those teams. And, of course, Tocchet came back much later in his career, and the team got to that conference final, Game 7 against the Devils, veteran leader at that point. And on the media side, having had a professional give and take relationship with Tocchet, I've always found him easy to deal with, honest, available, respectful. So all those things, like I just like the guy, right?
Sure.
Love him as a player, like dealing with him on a professional level. But you have to separate that sometimes and go, okay, what is a fair criticism and what is not a fair criticism? And I do think there are things where Tocchet will dig in his heels sometimes, and maybe he might want to consider some other options. So he's not always right by any stretch of the imagination, but I think on the whole, I think he's done an admirable job with what he's had to work with. And there was no way, no chance that the Flyers are going to fire him. Just you can tweet it from here to the moon.
It's not
happening this year.
Not realistic. Yeah.
Probably not happening the next year either.
Right.
Now, when you get into year 3 and you're not making progress or something along those lines, then yeah, coach is on the hot seat. But he was just a year removed from being the Jack Adams Award winner.
Yeah.
And they hired him here, and he's never really had a talent-laden team. That Vancouver team, he got them to overachieve a bit, right? Had the one really good year where he won the Jack Adams. He had a year with the Coyotes where they had all kinds of issues with management. Are they going to stay in Arizona? All kinds of distractions around the team. A lot of young players on that team, and they overachieved that year too. And then there were other years where they kind of weren't expected to do much and didn't do much. So the other thing too is I think that Tocchet takes criticism, and sometimes fairly so, with some of the younger players, because he definitely has faith in the veterans. I mean, he's just the kind of coach who believes more in the veteran players. Other guys have to prove themselves a little bit more. But I did find it funny. They go, oh, well, he almost ruined Clayton Keller. It's funny because when Clayton Keller was in town, and this is before Tocchet was hired, he was really on a heater at that point, and he was naming the guys who had really helped him along the way. First name he said was Rick Tocchet. He said that I didn't always understand some of the stuff that he was preaching to us. I didn't always agree with it. I think he made me a better player for it, a more complete hockey player for it. So he didn't feel like he was ruined, right?
Yeah.
And then so I do think the players will look back ultimately and go, okay, now I understand. Once you've hit another level in your career, and hopefully also when you've started playing on some winning teams, okay, now I understand. This is what it takes to win as the games get tougher, what it takes to win when you get to the playoffs. He certainly knows what it's about, what that's like from his own playing days. He played for winners everywhere he went, pretty much. At least, certainly in Philly and Pittsburgh he did.
That's what I don't understand, really, Bill. That like you have this criticism of Tocchet in a sense with Michkov. Like you might not understand or like maybe how the situation's unfolded, but to think that he isn't giving the young player advice on certain things that he should learn that are actually like correct on the ice. I mean, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Just due to the fact that he's been there himself and. Think about all the other players he's already helped, for example, like a Clayton Keller, like a Sidney Crosby, throughout his career, even as a head coach and assistant coach. So I just think it's pretty puzzling to me that there would be a section of individuals that wouldn't think that he would have something to offer to these young players because he's obviously won himself and been on winning teams and coached winning teams. So you're going to have that knowledge to pass on, hey, this is how you have to play to, win this puck battle in April in the playoffs, or this is how you have to play to, win this playoff series or play this certain way in certain situations to maybe close this game out. So it's really puzzling to me. I don't understand it, but.
And also he's a very good communicator too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, beyond the fact that players always know where they stand, I mean, they knew where they stood with Tortorella too. He made that very clear. But Tocchet is a very hands-on coach. You'll see him at practice, and he'll tell the players something, and he will demonstrate what he wants them to do. Hands-on, right? He will show them. Now, maybe that's more of an assistant coach thing normally. You see the head coach doing that.
But as a former player, why not?
As a former player who was a really high-level player who made himself into a high-level player, right? Had a 100-point season, had 40-goal years, etc. 400-plus goals for a guy who was drafted in the 6th round, who came up as more of an enforcer and a checker in his earliest years and made himself into a top player in the league for a long, long time. Tons of games played. We all know about the physical element that he brought, the competitiveness. Made himself a goal scorer too, without a ton of natural ability. So when he speaks to his team, it has a certain catch with the players. They know, they know that he knows what he's talking about. Doesn't mean they always agree with it.
He's gone through the same things essentially.
Exactly.
So.
He's been through the same thing.
To add to that, Bill, it does remind me of like in the preseason. I think it was preseason, maybe it was even before that, but he was talking about how his preparation for a season was very different when he first started his career until he trained with actual veterans of the Flyers, and that changed his approach to the game, how he prepared for a season, right? We do talk about Michkov, I guess, as being the hot topic around that. But I think the harshness and the bluntness is kind of like, that's how I am. Like, I'm very hard on myself with things. I'm very blunt about things. Like, I hate excuses for myself. And I could kind of see that, like, that's the way he treats himself. So that's kind of how it stems to everybody else, because he's like, when I remove those excuses or the rationalizations from my own game, I was able to excel from being a 6th-round pick, enforcer checker to being an all-star. And it's really the values and the self-truth. And I feel like that's probably what makes people so uncomfortable, which I think Tortorella did a little bit of too, right? But I feel like it is kind of key to being a good coach is also getting people to fight against, whatever it is, their bad habits that they're rationalizing. And, you could throw the Michkov not showing up prepared. And this was kind of my attitude towards the Michkov thing is he comes in, probably in okay shape his rookie year, right?
Oh, that's fair. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. In his rookie year, okay shape, and has a tremendous first year. So he goes in to the offseason probably a little cocky, going, well, I don't really need to change much. I'm already getting better. I was hot at the end of the year. Goes and has fun. He's a millionaire for the first time in his life, right? He has all this
Gotta
money,
factor that in,
young,
yeah.
right? And then probably did get hurt. It's kind of like I was gonna do my homework, but the dog ate it type of situation, and then got bit in the ass for it. And I feel like this is kind of like what Tocchet is talking about is like we need to remove all of that stuff. Like you need to always assume that you need to be as professional, hardworking, and honest with yourself as possible. And I think that conversation, especially on the internet, makes people incredibly uncomfortable because it is an uncomfortable situation. But I think it is who Tocchet is as a person. And that's probably why it comes off the way it does. I think he is just super blunt. And we saw it in that interview, which it didn't make me uncomfortable, but it obviously made a lot of people very uncomfortable with how he answered the Michkov question, which he didn't do a good job when it comes to media and nuance. But, for those who are not comfortable with that type of conversation, it just was like fuel to a fire, in my opinion.
He was being honest, essentially. But, I mean, in that situation, a little too honest. But I think he was trying to prove a point in that conversation that should have been kept closer to the vest, obviously, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, Toc really could have handled that a lot better. I think Toc would tell you that himself.
Yeah.
That in the situation, he got his back up. He got a little bit too defensive, maybe, and so he dug his heels in on it. In terms of what the actual gist of the message was. So let's take a step back to training camp. And I will tell you, and I've said it on a couple of other podcasts too, when the Flyers had their rookies game in Allentown against the Rangers rookies, a member of management spoke with Jason Martinez and me and had said, we've got a little problem here because Michkov is pretty out of shape. That's before they had day one on the ice in camp. So we got a kind of a heads up that he might get off to a slow start. That's one of those things you get told that, that's off the record. You keep it quiet.
Of course.
Understood. Subsequently got some information further about it that Michkov reported to camp. And mind you, there's two different measures of how a player reports to camp. There's a number on a scale that you report at. And that was a little bit over where they wanted him, but it was the wrong kind of weight. That was the bigger problem. Now he reported to camp with a body fat percentage that for an average person in society his age, okay, fine. It's about average, right? But for a professional athlete, no. It was the kind of body fat percentage that guys like Pat Falloon reported to camp with, that Pavel Brendel. I'm not saying he's going to turn out to be either guy in his career. I'm just saying that
we have to be honest, with what happened.
That's set up alarm bells. Like for a professional athlete, a body fat percentage that high, and I'll say it was in the 20s. Okay,
that's way too high.
Way too high for a professional athlete.
Yeah.
So it set him on a course where he's just playing catch up for months. Now the Flyers did have a stretch early this season where they had a lot of off days, a lot of home games. So he was able to shed a lot of that weight and go on a diet plan and those kind of things too. But you're playing catch up for months, and other guys too are taking advantage of that time as well. From what I understand, in terms of where his weight is, it's not excessive at this point. The number on the scale is fine now, but what he really has to do is obviously finish the season as strong as he can, but have a really good off season in the gym, on the ice, nutritionally. He said that he's going to stay here and spend the whole summer working out. We'll see if he follows through on that. But I think it's critical that he does that. And if he does those things, we know the talent level that he has. That's never been a question mark. And the other part of it too is, you come in and you make a splash in the league adjusts to you. Then you have to counter adjust to the way the other teams are playing against you. You know, so other teams know they can burn them like below the goal line, right? So they check them, and a lot of times too, he has a tendency to stop moving his feet, coming through the neutral zone, trying to make low percentage plays, thread pucks through sticks and those kind of things in areas where you just can't do it. When one thing that Tocchet has said to him, and I don't think, I mean, he's not the only coach who's ever said it to a player. A lot of coaches have said this, but I think it's just trying to make the decision tree as simple as possible. It comes down to this. If there is open ice between you and the defenseman, so you see white ice between you and the D, okay, try to make a play, make a move. Okay. Now, if the ice is behind the D and they're on you, don't make a move, make a play, put it behind them, and then bust after it to try to retrieve it. It's not always dump and chase, though. It really is a decision that's involved. Now, if he has ice and he ends up losing the puck or something, you know, you're going to live with that because you know he will make a lot of plays for you. I do want to discuss a little bit, and I want to get your guys' take on it first.
Sure, please.
The switch from right wing to left wing. I will tell you that I think that is completely overblown for several reasons. But I want to turn it to you guys first before I give my take on it.
Yeah, so the right wing to
ahead.
left wing, personally, I think it's very overblown. Like, I just think if you're on, you know, you're off wing and you're shooting, obviously, like, you have your forehand advantage, sure, that's fine. But if you're on that opposite side, like in terms of Michkov, sure, he played his whole career, you know, on the right wing. Now he's playing left wing. It might be a little bit out of the ordinary for him, but I just think in terms of playing wing in general, like one or the other is not that big of a difference. And if anything, if you're trying to help him out from a defensive standpoint, you're going to want him to play on the left wing so he can actually receive the puck on his forehand. He's not clearing things on his backhand. It'll be a little bit more natural for him if he's getting the puck in those situations. If you're not, and you're getting it on your backhand, the chance of you turning it over, it's going to be way higher. That's just the nature of it. And my opinion, if you don't believe that, I don't know, like in terms of like you playing hockey, what your understanding is, because you might have not stepped on the ice before. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely echo what Vasili's saying. My thing is there are positives to both. Defensively, obviously, it's without a doubt being, if you're left-handed, being on the left side, you're going to be better off in the defensive zone or just making those simple plays. And again, you talked about keeping his game simple. I think players of his talent should be able to be successful on both sides of the ice. Obviously, the off-wing comment, he obviously is off-wing if he's a left-handed playing on the right side, which I thought people were being ridiculous about that. It shouldn't hurt his game. I am very much okay with him playing on the left side. I suggested it last season, and I think he did play on the left wing at times last season and was successful at it, playing with Konechny and Couturier. Played probably some of his best hockey. For me, the whole being left-handed on the right side, I'm completely okay if that only happens on the power play, where I think that makes the most sense to me. But during 5-on-5, I think it's completely reasonable, especially for an unestablished young player and one that came into camp out of shape, where you're trying to simplify his game. Somebody who's not the best two-way. I think he has improved, but he's still slightly below average, right? So you have to kind of simplify the game so he improves it. So that's how we kind of see it. And that's how me and him have always seen it. We were never panicking about changing sides. I mean, if we can ask, other players to do it, why can't we ask Michkov? It's not like he's on this thing where we have to cushion and nerf the league for him just to be a superstar. Then he's not a superstar.
Yeah. It's just puzzling to me, though. Then we'll hand it off to you, Bill, because whether you're on the right or the left, functionally your job is the same as the winger. So in terms of creating scoring opportunities, finding open spaces, whatever he needs to do to be successful offensively isn't going to change much whether you're on the right wing or the left wing. So I think it's something people can point to more as an excuse for Michkov versus just maybe criticizing him. I don't know if that's the case, but that's the way I see it. What's your thoughts, Bill, just on the whole debate?
So yeah, I'm right with you guys. I'll just add 3 quick points on top of that. One way that it helps you defensively, besides being on your forehand more often is when you're carrying the puck out of the D zone, you're exposing the puck to the side of the boards rather than over the middle of the ice, right? If he's on the right side carrying up the ice, well, he's exposing it over the middle. So if he turns it over, it's much more dangerous if you're turning it over in the middle than turning it over along the boards. So that's one piece of it. The second part of it is that once he's over the blue line, he's essentially positionless. He roams a lot, and if you look at a couple of assists that he's had, where he started out on the left, swooped around behind the net, and made a play on the right side, and was able to protect the puck, mind you, moving around, because he had that ability to get his legs moving, use his body to shield the puck a little bit better. That way, he was able, and then he made a play on the other side. So, if he has this supercomputer hockey mind, as people say, it's not really that huge of an adjustment. And then when he is in the offensive zone, not exactly the same, but the same way where Zegras has, he's had success playing a hybrid of center and wing, and he roams the offensive zone a lot. He score from the right side, score from the middle, that kind of thing. Michkov would do the same thing. He's smart and creative enough to be able to do that. Third and final point on that, and I don't know if you guys watched the video that was just posted. The NHL video coach broke down plays. But the other part of it too is that if you look at the bottom line numbers, because remember Michkov played he was a 14 or 16 games of the season. I think he played on the right side, then he moved to the left. His points per game were almost exactly the same. So it hasn't really made much statistical difference. Now you're going to say, well, shots are coming from different places too, but that goes back to the point of being positionless. When he's over the blue line, he has a green light to read plays, and if he's going to the right, just communicate with your line mates so that you're not totally overloaded on one side. But these are all things you can adjust to. I don't like the excuse of it's the line mate's fault, right?
Oh yeah.
I don't buy that. Now, ultimately, right, if you're putting a guy down in the lineup, down toward, and you're playing him with a couple of AHL guys or something, then yeah. But he's not playing with AHL
It's
guys.
not like Cates and Brink are devoid of talent or they haven't produced offensively at all.
Why didn't Forrester suffer playing with Cates and Brink?
Exactly where I was going with that. That was your best line for really all season, most of last season once they got together.
It's cherry-picked arguments, it seems, to
I think it all
Michkov in a sense, right? Like,
yeah.
I think a lot of this, like, it's obviously not great that Michkov is coming in, out of condition in the way he did. You don't want to see him struggle the way he did in a sophomore slump, but you have to remember, I think, with players of this age, like he's still only 21 years old, super young, lots of time for development. Like, just look at Connor Bedard's sophomore season. You see Michkov's sophomore slump. You kind of think, hey, maybe something like that can happen. I just think of it in all of this as a learning experience. Like, if you're Michkov, you have to think about all that happened to him. Like, is he really going to want a repeat of this next season? So you have to think, hey, he's probably going to be motivated, or you at least hope this summer to train well, come back and have a strong start to next year, right? So, like, I look at it that way, and I look at another year, in the NHL, in North America, learning the English language. I think those two things coupled together will probably benefit him. So
yeah, I think definitely working on his English this summer, just being here, that's another thing that I think would help him as well. I think that's a very fair point too. That a lot of really prominent players in the league, right, didn't have great second seasons, and if you go to a guy, even go to a superstar like Nathan McKinnon. Now he missed
slump.
He missed like 18 games or something his second season, but he still only had 14 goals, 38 points, even missing 18 games. That was a disappointment, right? But he learned from it, and he got better for it. Players quite often get better from facing that adversity and working through it. And I do think ultimately he will be a better player for it. And I'm hopeful in the next year, 2 years, that remember when he struggled a second year? I really do think there's a very real possibility of that happening. I do think everybody needs to calm down a little bit.
Yeah, and And I'm sorry to cut you off, Bill, but you brought up Nathan McKinnon, who is known to be like a nut about
Yeah.
his diet and fitness. I mean, I would imagine that second year probably woke him up. And we like to talk about Macklin Celebrini here, and obviously an immensely talented young player, but we always talk about who his father is. And then you look at the conditioning that he's in and how
Yeah.
key that is. I think
Not by surprise.
I don't
Yeah.
think that Michkov would, be the best player in the league in his second year, but I think this is clearly all rooted in being not in good enough shape. And it just is. We can be upset about it. It's just the reality. He
And
needs to
yeah,
change it.
as a professional athlete, like it's true, you cannot come into like the NHL in that state. I think he would even probably tell you that himself
Yes.
at this
And
point,
I'll
right?
tell you, Bill, like this is not to brag on here, but I take fitness extremely seriously. I am 7 days a week in the gym. I count my calories. I do all of this stuff. So for me, it's no excuse. Like, and I'm a huge Michkov fan. It's no excuse. It's not that difficult to do. It's something you're a professional now. It's something he has to do. So, like, for everybody making mistakes from Michkov, all I hope is that he learns from it, uses the failure, and use it to project yourself forward, and you'll never look back again. Like, that's how I kind of see it. There are no elite players in this league that do not take care of their body. I guess maybe the one outlier is like Phil Kessel, but I don't know if that's actually true or just, there's just stories about him loving hot dogs,
Yeah. Yeah. No, these are things that are all under his control. There's
Right.
a lot in his life and in this
I
game
love that. Yeah.
beyond your control, but things like your conditioning, your diet, your preparation,
It's a,
those are all things you can control.
yes. And what I said to Vasili, I think this was 2 weeks ago, I'm like, your job as a young player is to come into the league and every offseason use that because you need the recovery time. It's not just the building the muscle. You need to build, break down, recover, eat right. It's a process. You can't do it during the Olympic break. To come in 10, 15, maybe 20%, improve stronger, faster, like every little element of your game needs to come in improved from one year to the next if you really want to project to be that player. And I use the example of Denver Barkey, who clearly, yes, he looks like he's 15 years old, but he's obviously in great shape. He's clearly very strong for his size. Like, that is the reason he was able to make the NHL at such a young age, not being as talented as Matvei Michkov, right? He's talented, but he's not like superstar level skills. The difference shows when the guys come in with the preparation. The preparation is what makes you, that next level athlete. I mean, we've seen across the board. Kobe Bryant is famous for it. You rarely does a guy not have to be physically prepared. And even like I'll go out of sport to Joel Embiid. That's one guy that he's already a superstar. I'm not going to say he's lazy or anything like that, but there's other guys like Iverson, these players where you're like, wow, if you just took practice like even a little more seriously, because Iverson was famous for making fun of practice, but like you probably could have been the best player in the league, right? It's like you're always kind of missing that next step. And I love what you said. That is completely under your control. That is the one thing that an athlete can control. And I think that's huge. I think that's what's key to Michkov coming in and elevating his game from where he was last year. So let's move on from Michkov, and I just want to ask, we focused a ton on Michkov. How do you think Tocchet has done with the rest of the team? Like how has he done developing players? Generally, it seems pretty positive. Like if we remove the outlier of Michkov, I would say most people took a step forward. Like even like Grabenkin, who came in not playing a lot, all of a sudden is very effective, even in minimal minutes. What would you say about his success coaching the rest of the squad?
I love the job that he's done with Owen Tippett.
Yeah,
and it's not just the number of goals. I would love to see Tip get that elusive 30-goal season this year, but his overall game is so much better. He's killing penalties, right? He's brought out a more physical element to his game that he's always had in him to do a little bit more consistently. I mean, with his size and his strength and his speed, he can make an impact in a lot of different ways. It doesn't just have to be by scoring. And I really think his game has grown. Whether he gets to his 30-goal season this year or not, and I think he's 11 or 12 away. I think he's 18 goals, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's there for him, but whether he reaches it or not, I think he's hit another level in his game. And I do think that certainly Rick Tocchet working with him has had an element to do with that as well. I think Cam York has taken a step back towards a more complete game this year. He took a big step backwards. Obviously had a very poor relationship with John Tortorella. That's not breaking any news to anybody. But I think overall he's embraced a lot of that challenge. I'd still like to see him hit another step higher. And I think Jamie Drysdale has been tremendously improved this season. Now Todd Reardon gets some credit for that too. And they took stuff that they learned from Brad Shaw, who I think did a hell of a job as an assistant coach here, working with the defenseman and the PK. I think Reardon has picked up from there, and I think that Drysdale has continued to improve. I thought that prior to the injury, and they've really missed him. I thought Forster was continuing to progress as well. The Flyers' needs are obvious, right? They are thin at center. There's only so many ways you can hide that, and they're on the little bit on the smaller side overall. So they have to work around a lot of that. They're a little small on D. Now there are things with Tocchet that I disagree with. For example, Emil Andre. I thought he sat way too many games leading into the break. He hit a little bit of a rut where he was struggling. Talk was saying, well, we need to get him back in the lineup before the break. We need to get him back in the lineup before the break. And then you go, well, we couldn't because it's the left-handed, right-handed thing. To me, left-handed, right-handed isn't ideal, but at some point you just have to figure, okay, these are the personnel we have to work with, and these are the best guys we have for what we need. The way that Andre can help you break out of the zone, because to me he's one of the two best guys are making the first pass out of the zone, the breakout pass. He'll turn some pucks over. He'll give up size, those kind of things. That's why, to me, he's more of a bottom end of the blue line guy, because there are things that just work against him.
You missed the first pass, though, for sure.
Yeah, they definitely have missed the first pass. And, nothing against Noah Juleson, but you know what he is, right? I really thought there were some opportunities there to get Andre back in the lineup, and they didn't. That's an area where I disagreed with Talk, but I think overall, on the whole, I think he's done a solid job. I don't think it's a coaching issue. I don't.
Yeah, I think that decision, and I bring this up to Vasili a lot. Coaches sometimes fall into this like coaching scared, I call it, like coaching not to lose. Yeah. And I think that's when they start coaching at their worst. That's how you end up not playing Andre. You're like, oh, but we're winning, and I don't want to lose this last game before and so then you don't want to make the changes that probably you should make, or play a player because you're afraid he's going to make a mistake. I feel like coaches are best when they're coaching fearless, which is not realistic because we see how often coaches are fired. But I do find that that usually is the most painful moments with coaches, when they're like afraid to make a mistake. Probably same with players. So let's get into this. There's a lot of the internet crowd, the same ones that are kind of freaking out over Michkov's situation, but that don't believe changes are coming. They think the Flyers are stuck in mediocrity. I've said this for a while, like tanking is a result of having no other options as an organization. You have no assets. You have no prospects. You have an aging roster. You're forced to tank. That's what it is. The Flyers were not forced to tank. They had some things. They had some options. They had a little bit of window to wait. The Flyers have made, I think Danny Briere has done a very good job as GM, clearing up cap space, adding a ton of young players, adding the assets, and now buying his window. And Vasili and I have been talking about, just if you look at the numbers, everything kind of pointed to the window really opening this offseason. And I've said this over and over again. It doesn't mean the floodgates are opening. Yeah. It means their window now is opening to really start pushing the team forward when they find those opportunities. I went through the roster top to bottom, meaning from the NHL level to the AHL level, and I counted somewhere around an estimate of 50% of this roster needs a decision made on it. So obviously the big names of Trevor Zegras, I'll just read some of them: Bobby Brink, Grabankin, Delorier, Grunstrom, Drysdale, Andre, Juleson, Samuel Ayerson, Philip Tomasino. And then if you go to the minors, it's essentially 80%, 90% of the roster are either RFAs or UFAs. There is clearly an immense amount of change coming to this roster, whether people believe it or not. I don't think Danny Briere is stupid. I don't think he is satisfied with where the Phantoms are, as in the standings, and I don't think he's satisfied where the Flyers are.
Yeah.
Do you think that me and Vasili's kind of overall sentiment that, there's a ton of openings in the roster, or at least decisions that need to be made, a lot of cap space, I think close to 40 million as of right now without re-signing anybody. Do you see that happening this summer, at least is that window opening? Again, and I want to clarify, does not mean, July 1st, Briere is on a shopping spree and brings in every player under the sun, but that window really opens and that there's a lot of decisions to be made on the roster itself.
Completely agree with that. I think the hard part is going to be, it's going to take some boldness to be able to make some moves that are going to help the team in a big way, right? Not just moving the needle a notch or two, but significantly moving the needle. Now, I've liked most of the moves that he's made. I understand why they gave Dvorak so much term on the extension, and also seeing what's out there this summer in free agency, there really wasn't much. Teams are extending players early. What the Flyers are going to have to do is they're going to have to be bold, and you want a guy, you go after him. And that means giving up assets. That means giving up some pieces that you'd rather not give up, right? And you're giving it up without any guarantees you're going to get this guy signed for the long term. Maybe signed for another year or two. You're hoping you start winning. You're hoping you convince this guy to stay in the long term. As some prominent players come up, maybe not free agents this summer, maybe a year away from free agency or 2 years maximum, you're going to take a leap of faith in some points. And there's always a potential getting burned where you give up a lot of assets, pieces that are important to your future that you want to have with the team. The Flyers have some depth on the wing, right? So that's an area where you have to consider what you're going to do. Now, let's just, and Jason Martinez has put this scenario just a hypothetical, okay? Because neither of us think it's actually happening. But let's say Austin Matthews is available this summer, but it's going to cost you Martone and 2 first-round picks, right? Do you do that? That's it's sometimes it takes those decisions. You go back to Paul Holmgren, and Homer made some good calls, some bad calls. But one thing that nobody can say about Homer was he wasn't bold, right? Homer was always swinging for the fences, always making that gutsy move, like the Chris Pronger trade, right? That was, and it worked out for a year. Then Pronger started breaking down on you physically. But that cost you big pieces in return, right? And
Lupul was really good. So
Lupul was really good, and ultimately cost you essentially 3 first-round picks because, Spiza didn't end up working out, but he was highly regarded at the time, and he had just been a first-round pick of yours a year or two before that, and then 2 first-round picks beyond that, and Lupul. That's an awfully bold trade to make for a guy who was getting into his mid-30s at that point. They had a trip to the Cup Finals because of it, et cetera. But that's an example of a bold move. They realized they weren't going to be able to re-sign Peter Forsberg. Well, they end up getting Tiemann and Hartnell in their primes out of that trade indirectly. But again, it's just being bold and sometimes changing course in a bold way. Danny might have to do that because, if they're waiting on what's already in the system, stockpiling some more assets, and nothing wrong with that, right? But you're stockpiling assets. Well, like we don't know what Jack Nesbitt is going to be, for example. They moved up in the draft this year to pick Nesbitt. Is that going to work out? We'll see, right? Jet Luchenko, forget the goal scoring aside because he needs to shoot the puck more. That's definitely part of it. I think Luchenko's sweet spot is going to be as a two-way playmaking winger. I don't think I think when players are wired to pass first, they're going to pass first. And the Flyers do have a lot of pass first guys on the team, in the system. But I don't know what Luchenko is going to be. But I'm not banking on him becoming a superstar. I'm not banking on Nesbitt becoming a superstar. I certainly don't want to trade Porter Martone, right? But I'm saying, like, well, what if the opportunity to get that big piece involves maybe trading, the best prospect in your system? You have to think about that long and hard.
You got to give to get sometimes, right? So it's a hard decision to weigh, right? So
for sure. And if you're looking in the free agency route, more and more teams just extend guys before they ever hit free agency.
Yeah.
Now what happened last offseason was there were all those rumors about offer sheets. There was not an offer sheet in the league, right? Not one. Not one.
How many times have we heard that before, Bill?
That's because they're a gross overpayment, which is why they do not happen.
Yeah.
Not only are you overpaying the player, but you're also paying the assets out.
Asset management doesn't make sense for you as an organization. Why am I going to pay through the nose to do this? Let me try to make a trade for this player. Maybe it might work out.
It has to be a guy that you think is a franchise player, and they typically
has to be that franchise level player. And if it's not, you're also overpaying that way too, right? You're particularly like a first line center. Like the teams aren't trading them. If they have a guy in his prime or reasonably in his prime, they're not trading him. Or it might be somebody who has tons of upside but hasn't hit that level yet. I always use Quentin Byfield as the example. Picked second overall, good player. Right? He's been a good player. Hasn't been close to anything like a franchise player, a true first line center. Could he still become one? Well, maybe. Right. So do you roll the dice there? You make a bold trade and maybe it works out and maybe he stays the same. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not the one making those decisions, but
definitely a tough one.
Well, Bill, this is something that we talk about all the time. Is I bring up leverage all the time, and I feel like this is why I think this offseason is the first year that it opens. When you have cap space, when you have assets, you have the roster space, you have the internal mobility.
Yeah.
You are trying to catch teams without it, right? It's like, I believe Danny has been working on a lot of trades that we have heard nothing about, and he is waiting for his window. And I think the evidence of that is the Trevor Zegras trade, right? We heard his name out there for 2+ years. And then he finally catches Anaheim being like, okay, you know what? We got Cutter Gauthier here. This offensive unit is full. I'm missing from my bottom, but we're probably not going to re-sign him. We gotta move on from this player now. I think that's what Danny is waiting for. And, it'll probably cost him more than Paling in a second when he inevitably makes a bigger move. But I think the leverage to make these moves where he can walk away from a trade is what he's been working on. Where they say, oh, we want Porter Martone. We go, well, and I think we saw that in the Quinn Hughes trade, right? Where he's like, I don't have to get Quinn Hughes right now. The online community might be freaking out, but we have been saying the exact same thing. And I argue with some people online. They're like, they told us this was the year. I went, they never told you that any of these years were the year. He is telling you that it'll happen when it happens. So that his attitude, in my opinion, is I have all the leverage. I have all the money. I have all the assets. I'm going to catch one of these teams in a bad position. That's how I'm going to get my guy or two or whatever. And that'll springboard them forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes a lot of conversations. Sometimes it takes not talking for a year because you're nowhere near an agreement, but you circle back another year away. It's a hard game. You know, there's no guarantees any route you take, whether you're tearing it down to the studs and you're going to rebuild through lottery picks. Well, okay, what if you're a lottery pick in a year where it's a pretty shallow draft, or the strength of the draft doesn't match your positional needs? Because you don't draft by position, you draft by best available talent. Well, what does the certain draft yield? What is the best available player? I mean, Flyers went in, and I do think that's a big reason why they moved up to trade Nesbitt, because you look at how many centers were going early in the draft. Well, they drafted a winger. They drafted a winger, though, because they thought he was the best available player with the highest upside, and certainly Martone's looking like he could be just about that.
Yeah.
Right? I'm expecting Martone to develop into a first-line player in the NHL. I think he will be that. So, okay, we had to wait a little bit in the center. And mind you, there were other centers that they had thought about, in that draft. O'Brien. Right. Actually, O'Brien would have been their first option had they not drafted Martone. Everybody was like Higgins, but from everything I've heard, Higgins wasn't going to be the guy. Yeah, it would have been O'Brien.
Yeah.
And whether that would work out or not, I don't know. Now you can go back even a little bit before that. In the Michkov draft, if Michkov had been off the board, as a lot of people thought that he might be, if he would have gone 5th or 6th, I think the Flyers would have gone with Dalibor Dvorsky.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. Yeah.
And and they really like Ryan Leonard too, and Leonard looked like he's going to be a really good player. But that was that opportunity to get a guy who they picture being a really quality center, but they couldn't pass up Michkov in that spot. Last year they felt like they couldn't pass up Martone in that spot. But there'll be a time that'll come where you're not picking that center in the middle of the first round and developing him over time. Hey, when they drafted Nesbitt, even in moving up, they knew he's going to spend 2 years in juniors and then probably a year in the American Hockey League after that, and hoping that he builds up his body and strength because he's still very thin. So add more muscle, continue to refine his skating, and I think ultimately over time he's going to be a very good NHL player. When will that be? Well, 3 years, 5 years, they don't know. You never know. You never know when you pick a player. That's always the uncertainty of a draft. I mean, that's why they're prospects and not NHL players.
Right.
So, the point being is that there is no one guaranteed route, whether that's trades or free agency or whatever. You need to get a little bit lucky sometimes, and you also need to, you need to identify some players that are under the radar. And that was really what I thought Bill Zito did magnificently.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in Florida. He found, not just the top of the draft guys, but some under the radar guys who ended up being much more than they were in other places.
Think about all those contributors, right? Like Forsling, like a Verhaeghe, there's a full list of them that are right now on the Florida Panthers. So
I mean, the Flyers need to do things like that. That is how teams develop depth.
Yeah.
That's how they, that's how they really get better. It's not just those top picks.
It's funny how the 2-time Stanley Cup champions and 3-time visitors have completely broken the Twitter mold of tanking and how you build your team, because he did it in a completely different way. But it still leaves people saying the exact same thing, that you need to tank for several years. No, you have to, I think the whole idea that there's only one way to build a team, it's like, no, you have all of these different levers that you can pull as a GM. You have to hit on them, and you have to pick your window properly. And I don't think the average fan, I don't think they understand when they even talk about tanking. I don't think they have the stomach for it. The people are complaining already. We're not even through this rebuild. Imagine a 10-year tank, where you're desperately trying to accrue assets. For all Celebrini and how incredible he is, San Jose is still not a good team. Chicago, for how amazing Bedard is, and they do have a slew of great young players, they stink, right? It's it takes a long time to build a team, and they have a lot more moves.
Even the Edmonton Oilers, who made the Cup Finals in back-to-back years, and McDavid has been everything he's ever hyped to be. And Draisaitl has been more than he was ever hyped to be. 2 absolute superstars in the game. Some of them won a cup, and they might not.
Right.
They've always had a flaw in goal. It's always one piece missing here or there, or it's it's a whole process to try to get to that contender level, and then it's another process to get over the top.
Right.
And look at Florida a year ago. Everybody thought that Marchand was washed, and maybe extending him was Not the best. Boy, he looked like the Marshawn of old in the playoffs when the chips are down, right? So,
Yeah.
Even this season, he's playing pretty well. So
that's somebody who takes fitness very seriously, his conditioning and fitness. And that's like going back to the Michkov stuff.
Yeah.
So talking about being bold, we have a trade deadline coming up. It's not that it's impossible to make the playoffs. For all we know, the Flyers could even go on a heater and get right back into the conversation. It's absolutely possible. But assuming they don't, I don't think the Flyers are that interested in removing from the roster. But if you look at the amount of turnover that is most likely due top to bottom in this roster, they have a few key names that need contracts that I'm not certain they have a definitive role on this team. And the two people that come to mind are Emil Andre and Bobby Brink.
yes.
And again, we talked about, being bold. Maybe there's a deal to be made even with a non-playoff team. I would say primarily I do see the Flyers' window to making trades being the offseason still. But there's obviously the Rasmus Ristolainen situation. There are, names out there. And that's, again, like when I hear Robert Thomas, the team's out of the playoffs, like maybe that's an offseason type of trade. But I do see these names. Do you see any move coming at the trade deadline, or do you think this is going to be more of like the offseason where teams are trying to figure out their roster? That's when the Flyers will kind of pick their window. Because when I look at Bobby Brink, I evaluate very similar to Morgan Frost. Like, okay, it's a guy, and to be fair to Bobby Brink, he's had a good year. I like him. I don't think the Flyers are like, we need to
13 goals
him.
in 50 games. I mean, he might get 20 this year. It's not bad. So.
Well, yeah, it's not a problem with him. It's a problem with the depth at wing.
Yeah, it's more the space. I think
role.
it's the whole point is look at how many wingers the Flyers have in the system. Right.
And
you
he
have to
has
make
the
space for other young
value.
guys potentially. So.
And he has the value in a trade. And I think somebody like Emil Andre would also have value in a trade. They're not negatives. You don't have to move a pick with them to get rid of them or something like this. And they have an undefined future.
Right.
Do you see anything that could possibly happen with them over the next few months?
I do. I think Brink is a guy who could go in two different directions if he's not here. I think he could be a pretty solid bottom six role player on a really good team, or he could be a top of the lineup guy on a team that's just building from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Over that window of time over the next couple of years. The funny thing with Brink is that people forget that he was a Hobie Baker finalist, that in the World Juniors for Team USA he was a PP1 guy, that he came here with a lot of hype, offensive expectations. He's actually scored a little bit more this year than I thought he was going to, because he's always been more of a passer than a goal scorer. I really like a lot of things about Brink in his game.
Yeah.
So if you move him out, it's not because you don't like the player. Had a discussion with Danny over moving Frost last summer. It was more just about trying to move the whole puzzle forward.
Right.
I mean, Morgan's in a situation in Calgary where he plays behind Kadri. Of course, Kadri might get traded, but he's playing behind Kadri. He's playing behind Backlund. He's playing in the third line in PP2. So if you look at that, right, and he's on pace for about 42 points, 42 points, something like that. It's only 42 points, but that's on third line in PP2. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Right? But
you get more minutes, who knows, right?
But is Morgan ever going to be, what his potential suggested that he might be originally, right? Like a top two center? Probably not at this point, right? He's going to be 26 years old in May. Big Frost guy, as everybody knows, but in terms of what you need him to be, if you're counting him to be a top six guy, well then you're going to have to look in other directions, right, to develop that in the system, and you only have so many cap dollars and so many contracts to go around. I think they did need a guy more like Dvorak, and I say that as a guy who's always been, a big believer in Morgan Frost, right? And Brink's the same kind of thing. Like I always have, and going back to something I said about talk too, where you have to separate the sentiment from the objective side, right? I always have a softer spot for guys who drafted, who developed,
Yeah, same.
who you saw in development camp, who you saw with the Phantoms, and you saw the work that they put in to improve their games and become NHL players and find what works for them in the NHL. But ultimately, you have to separate yourself from that and, in a more dispassionate way, look at what your team's needs are, and and Brink is the guy you might be able to move in a deal that opens up some opportunities elsewhere. And it's the same thing with Andre as well. It might be the best for the player too in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, and again, Vasili and I have talked about this quite a bit. It's just a numbers game, right? I mean, right now, Barkey's up early. Bump hasn't even had his opportunity yet. We still have Grabankin, who needs a decision made on him. Porter Martone is almost a surefire NHL player in his first year. There's almost no chance. That also doesn't include Luchenko, right, in that conversation. We don't know where he's going to start, but there is a chance he's going to start in the NHL as well. That might shift, Noah Cates over to the wing even, right? Yeah. So you just kind of look at the numbers game, and it's like, okay, why not trade a guy when his value's still high? A team has control over him. He is a valuable player. He's not a player that a team, and we're trying to find a package to improve the team. Him and Andre just seem like they're ripe for that, where they're guys with upside, with control, with value, something a team would covet, in a return. And it's not like you're, scraping the bottom of the barrel. And if you package Brink with a first and, or something like that, or another prospect, now you're talking about a larger return, which is maybe what you're looking for. It's, like you said, it's a sheer numbers game. What do you think about somebody like Ristolainen, who, I know he's having a really strong showing at the Olympics right now. I don't really believe in the scouting him. Maybe the health in his the confidence in his health is partially due to that. But you don't need a book on Ristolainen. You know who he is right now as a GM. I think his value is still relatively high. He's a rare commodity, mammoth size, right-handed defender who can skate, shoot, move the puck, very physical. I think most teams would have value in him. I don't think the Flyers are jumping to remove somebody like that from their team because they don't have many. Like you said, we're very small in the back end. But it could be an opportunity when you're going into an offseason where you are making a bunch of changes anyway. Yeah. How do you see the Ristolainen situation kind of playing out?
Exactly the same as you just said. If they could get a first-round pick, even a conditional first-round pick this year to move him with a year left on his contract, they'll do that. Otherwise, it's something you look at in the offseason, or you look at this next season moves along. Does have to stay healthy. One of the funniest things with Risto is that it's a guy who's completely changed his game, right? And it's funny, for all the criticism he took over the years. Well, do you want the 40-point defenseman who leads the league in hits but is minus 40 because he's always out of position, or do you want the one who keeps things very simple? Block shots, is physical around the net, makes that first pass, and generally stays at home. Otherwise, which versions of them do you like better? I like the second version better.
Yeah, same.
Honestly, the 40-point guy who crushed people. That might not. I don't know. I think Risto has been a better player for it. But I do have concerns about his health.
The health, yeah.
Tricep surgery, back-to-back years, just missed time again recently, and then I don't think it helps that every time Risto gets hurt, it's like he goes in the witness protection program forever.
You never
see him.
There's
never an update on him. Never an update on him. So it's like, okay, well, he's day to day, but we've heard he's day to day. He ended up missing half the year or missing the rest of the year. So.
What would be amazing, Bill? This is how I kind of view it. I always think back at the Alexei Zhidnik trade.
Yeah.
Or Braden Coburn. Ideally, if I could move Ristolainen for anything, it's like something like that. Defenseman who, like you said, had talent maybe at one point. I don't think Simon Nemec would be available, right? But that's a second overall pick that is not really panned out. Can we find one of these guys that were highly coveted? That's something I would
prospect,
look to switch.
Make a move, right?
23 years old, something like that.
Yeah, and in terms of what else is out there this summer, I think you have to be careful. Like Darren Radish, we just talked about it with somebody today. It's like Look at his numbers this year. Don't ever expect those again. Do not ever expect those
Right.
again. Pay him
When
like
you're
he's
playing
going to
with
do that
Nikita
again.
Kucherov on the power play, you can
Exactly.
rack those assists up pretty easy.
Exactly. And 17 goals too so far this year.
Yeah.
Like don't pay him based on that. Pay on him based on his history, his age, those other things. Like don't fall into that sucker's trap of committing 5 years and way too much money to a
At
guy
like
like that based on what
9
he
million.
did this
Yeah.
year. I don't know. I think Danny is savvier than that. I do.
Yeah, same.
But that's going to be a name that's going to be out there this summer. So I think that a lot of times, you look at guys on other teams and what they're doing there, and I think there's a tendency to go, oh, well, they're going to do that here, right? Saw that in Florida with Mackenzie Weegar, the Florida Panthers Mackenzie Weegar versus the Calgary Flames Mackenzie Weegar, right? He was playing with so much around him in Florida that it hid some weaknesses of his that are on full display in Calgary. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, that definitely matters. But I will say, I do think Danny Briere has done, like, if I look at his offseason and you look at every move he made, I mean, the Ryan Ellis trade, to move on from that, to not eat any of the cap space, to get a valuable NHL player. He might be a fourth line player, but he can play, and he's potted in some goals. The Dvorak signing ended up being a home run. The Vladar signing was a home run. The trade for Zegras was a home run. He had a very tentative, he moved very precisely this offseason, but every move went the right way. He has the skill to pull this off. So last segment that I want to get to is just talking about prospects, and specifically Flyers prospects. We mentioned Nesbitt already. Jack Berglund is a guy who's very intriguing. I look at him and I go, okay, he's not dominating men's hockey over there, but he's starting to produce. I notice his numbers have gone up from the first half to the second half. He's actually producing against men. He obviously had an exceptional World Juniors. He's another prospect that online Flyers fans called a bust before they even saw him. Now the narrative has completely changed. I do think they have a pretty strong pool of centers with Luchenko, Berglund, and Nesbitt. They haven't had anything like this for a while, even if you want to include like Dorwart into that conversation. But, how do you see the Flyers kind of prospect pool working its way into the Phantoms going into next season? Do you think Jack Berglund could be brought over? Because I do think he is kind of on that fine line now of they could let him develop over there. It's probably not a problem. But at the same time, there's a lot of turnover now on the Phantoms. There might be a great spot for him in that top 6 spot on the Phantoms. Maybe him and Luchenko are 1 and 2. And then there's also the exemption spot for Nesbitt, which, again, I kind of don't think that's going to happen. And there's no other player that really is going to fall under that category.
Yeah, my personal thought on Berglund is 1 more year in the SHL. As you said, he's competing against men. He's he's at the point where he's too good for Swedish juniors.
Oh yeah,
and you loan him out to an Allsvenskan team. Maybe you do that again. You can't really always go by numbers in SHL with young players because they a lot of times they're the 13th forward, which you can dress that extra body in the lineup, and so he's playing 5-6 minutes. It's so he has maybe a lot of numbers in terms of games played. Well, where what's going, and been that happens in Sweden, it happens in Russia, happens everywhere really in Europe. I would like to see him play 1 more year over there. Continue to work on his skating a little bit, and then I think the year after that he'll be ready. And you didn't mention Heikki Ruohonen, who's a very similar. He's a very similar player to Berglund. Very similar strengths and weaknesses. 2-way guy, big body. I think he'll play at least 1 more collegiate season, and then maybe join the Phantoms the year after that. If you look at the group of centers the Flyers have there, they definitely have some depth. They have some guys that I think are going to be NHL players. Hopefully, some of them can be, at least like top 6 guys in the NHL. Honestly, my feeling is more top 9 guys with that group. Hey, nothing wrong with it. You need that. If you have depth in that too, there's a little bit of safety in numbers. You have several of those guys. Well, a couple of them should develop, right? But is there that really just top end guy? That no, I don't think that's in the system right now. So but that doesn't mean they're not good players. And when you approach drafting, unless you are drafting at the very top, right? The general expectation is it's going to take time to develop these guys. Even if they are drafted at the top, it's going to take some time to develop them, maybe a little longer to get them to the NHL level. You're trying to develop future NHL players, and if some of these guys surprise and go on to become stars, that much the better.
Mm-hmm.
But I rarely look at a draftee, not just the Flyers, pretty much anywhere in the NHL, and I go star.
Right.
It's you're really just okay. If he comes to the NHL, ultimately, what's his role going to be? And if he does not play that role, okay, what's plan B? Because if he's not going to be a top line guy or top six guy, okay, does he have role playing potential? Those are all things that teams look at. Okay, what's his floor? What's his ceiling? How likely is he to get somewhere in the middle? I do think the Flyers have several prospects at center who I do think will be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and maybe that's the opportunity to make a move because you have a few guys kind of in that mushy middle, and you need to package a couple of them or package one of them in a deal, right? Maybe
and then some of the wing
Luchenko.
depth, maybe, right?
Right.
You never know what can happen. So,
is there anybody else that you could see being part of the Phantoms equation going into next season? Because we have a lot of NCAA guys.
Yeah,
we got some young guys. They obviously drafted a lot of players. Carter Amico's kind of trying to find his way now. He went to I know he's not ready for pros, but he went to U.S. Hockey League. Noah Powell's moving around. There's just all these guys kind of out there between U.S. Hockey League, NCAA, and then Europe. But it's hard for me outside of Luchenko, and that's why I brought up Berglund, because I'm like, that's one guy who could probably play for the Phantoms. Yeah. But is there any other guys that you could see moving their way up? Maybe Cole Knuble being a guy.
I think Knuble actually when spoke to a couple guys in hockey ops, it was earlier this year, they thought Knuble was going to be a pro next season, probably with the Phantoms. Knuble is certainly a potential guy, and does he play center? Does he play wing? Right, he's a little on the smaller side for a center, but I do think Knuble will be a pro. I think Shane Manzaghi will be a pro next season.
Okay.
That was the guy who they mentioned maybe turning pro whenever Michigan State is done this year. Now, this is a guy who's going to be a third line or fourth line guy in the NHL, but a good one. I think the amount of energy he brings, winning so many puck battles, he'll be one of those guys who is part of the winning process without necessarily with the numbers side. So that's a guy I would point to. I think will be playing pro a year from now. And also sometimes you never know, right? It's like a guy like Ty Murchison.
Somebody impresses, right? Potentially.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I brought up the example of Ty Murchison. That was not really a guy that I was figuring was going to be part of the plan.
Yeah.
And then, because he played 4 years in not a very high-profile program, never saw his games on TV.
Didn't seem to be on the radar for a lot of people.
Didn't seem to be on the radar. I mean, the Flyers certainly liked him and hung in with him. But, that's so sometimes those guys who are not getting a lot of press and publicity, and even when you talk to the hockey ops people, who are your top prospects, they're tending to focus on the higher profile guys. That's just nature of the beast. So I do think there will be a couple guys who join the Phantoms from within the system, and they've been willing to take some chances on some guys too. I didn't think Devin Kaplan was going to get signed, right? But they signed him. Whether he'll ever move up to the NHL or not, we'll see. I'm a little skeptical on that, but they will actually take a chance on some guys in the system, and some guys end up being better pros than they seemed in college too. So, you don't always know, but I do think you'll see a couple guys filtering up to give a short answer to a long question.
Okay. So I want to end on this just because this player is new and he has exceeded expectations statistically. You might already know who I'm talking about, but he is very under the radar. But the Q is a tricky league with statistics, I find.
Yeah.
Nathan Quinn just keeps producing 59 points in 45 games, scoring some nice goals. I've only
He has a
seen
nice
some
release.
highlights. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the biggest center, but I'm very curious your thoughts on him because it seems like his growth from last year to this year has been pretty immense. I don't know what that means for his NHL future or what his like ceiling is an NHL player, but what can you tell us about Nathan Quinn?
Yeah, certainly he's taken a nice jump this season. You know, I mean, you look at a guy like Gendron, right, who put up huge numbers in
Yeah,
the Q one seed.
goal a game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know, it's a whole different ball game when you turn pro, etc. I don't want to pigeonhole a player because you never know how he's going to develop. My honest feeling with Quinn is I think he's going to be a pretty good American League player at some point.
okay. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, he was a late pick for a reason. Actually, you touched on something real quick before we depart with you. This is something that I am struggling with because a lot of people take the stats and it's like this very surface level analysis, like, oh, Nesbitt should be way over a point per game, and if he's not good, and it's just they're just looking at statistics and then judging a player when it's very clear there's so much more beyond that when assessing a prospect. What are your thoughts about like statistical output for prospects, and how important is it for determining their future?
Well, it certainly is a piece of it. It's always been a kind of a rule of thumb, but nothing is ever 100%, right? But it's always been a rule of thumb that dominating junior hockey, collegiate hockey, you know, European hockey, as you mature a little bit, you know, dominating at that level is not a guarantee of NHL success in the long haul, right? But not doing it, the odds are against you becoming an offensive impact player. But you know, you can have many roles on a team, and I mean, I'll give the example, and he was picked in the first round. I mean, look at Tom Wilson when he played for Plymouth. Look at him in his early years in the NHL. What was he? He was a fourth line player, right? Now,
Physical player, guy who can hit, not a guy that's going to score a lot for you, right?
Exactly. And what's he done? He's worked at it and worked at it and worked at it, and he's become a scorer on top of a
It's like modern day Rick Tocchet.
Very very similar to Talk, right? So you don't always know. You know, so I think that you look at stats, but I do think you have to see the games. You can't just go by the numbers and really just tracking. Okay, how's he coming along physically, right? How's he coming along when he's playing without the puck? Is he wearing a letter on this team as not as a guy who's 18, 19 years old, right? I mean, that was one of the things that really stuck out, I thought, with Barkey, right? He was pegged as a leader with plenty of junior eligibility left to go.
Yeah.
And that really jumped out, particularly given who his coach was. It's not like Dale Hunter's an easy guy to please, right?
Sure.
Big game situations, that playoff run, his draft year, he kept, every time he had a key shift late in the game, Hunter was setting him over the boards. That's in his draft year. Even though he was a third round pick guy. So that's the guy who you're going, there's some upside there. Maybe the numbers didn't jump, right? But there's a lot of things beyond the numbers. Okay. Now, did he add 12 pounds of muscle, at age 18, 19? If he's in college hockey, now he's playing against quite often older players, more physically developed players. How's he doing against those guys? Gives you a little bit of a sense of how he might compete at the NHL level. What are the things that he has to work on? Now, a lot of times, if a guy puts up big numbers in junior hockey, they can get away with a lot of things they're not going to be able to get away with at the higher level, particularly. I'll use Frosty as an example again.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
If you watch his old games with the Sioux, he used to be able to. I mean, it was the year he's, I think, plus 83 that year, just because his hands are so quick, right? And he could saucer a pass over 2 sticks to a guy on the other side, how to even find him, right? And without moving his feet, he could do it from a standstill. Well, guess what? If you're at a standstill at the NHL level, you're going to lose the puck.
Yeah, you can't do that. People are always chasing you, right?
So so it takes time to make those adjustments, and so it's so it's certainly not an apples to oranges or an apples to apples comparison. Rather, sometimes apples to oranges comparing a guy in the queue versus the OHL versus college hockey versus European hockey. It's not always now. I know there were some models that have trying to come up with what the statistical equivalent might be, trying to even them out. It doesn't really always work that way. So
no, yeah.
So I do think you look at the numbers, you don't just toss them out, but I don't think they're not gospel. You don't live by them.
Yeah, well said. Vasili, anything else for Bill before we let him go?
No, but just awesome to have you on, Bill, as always. Really appreciate it, and it was really fun talking hockey with you.
Yeah, always a pleasure, guys.
Yeah. Anything you want to tell our audience about? I mean, obviously, Hockey Hot Stove, your stuff is on the Flyers website, and obviously NHL.com. Anything else you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I have a couple exciting things coming up with the Flyers alumni. We have Friday night fights every year. It's March 6th this year. Actually, also NHL trade deadline day. For the first time in a lot of years, Ben Wilson's coming back to Philly. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh wow, that name.
So that'll be really a cool thing. Some of the names they got this year: Willie Plett, who he was a big fighter back in the '70s. I grew up watching him. You have George Larocque and Donald Brashear this year. Every year, so it's always it's always a lot of fun. And then after that, you have the Alumni Charity Classic weekend, which is in June. So wanted to get that out there.
Awesome. Well, everybody definitely make sure to check that out in March. Bill, thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on and talking to us. And obviously, everybody make sure to check out Bill's content. If you're not, I don't know what you're doing. Bill, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Anytime, guys. Take care.
Take care. All right. So that was an awesome segment with Bill. I think we took him pretty deep on topics.
Got to pick his brain on a lot of things, which is nice.
Yeah.
But he knows so much about hockey, so just to get, his opinion on certain things, certain topics that we have been discussing, I think,
right.
The listeners that listen to our opinion will obviously enjoy Bill's opinion. I'm sure they listen to Flyers Daily and all the Hockey Hot Stove podcasts as well. So
yeah, I mean, I like to say I started in the school of Bill Meltzer. It's the first thing I said to him when I had him on here for the first time, because it's like that's how I kind of learned a lot of my mentality. Was from Bill, and he still checks after all this time. But it's good to, like you said, to get another voice in here. We don't have a ton of guests on anymore. Like I used to do a guest before you joined, like every week. Now it's just like me and you most of the time. But check our own assumptions against what Bill has to say. Seems like we're pretty on point in Bill's world. But that was pretty good. Yeah, we'll have more content next week. We're getting close to coming back to Flyers hockey, where we're going to have some news. Flyers are back in practice, and apparently Bjarnason was called up, which we didn't really talk about, but
Bjarnason gets called up. We'll have to see, what happens with Urson. I know there was some sort of like a lingering potential injury. Yeah. You saw Kolosov get called up and then get sent back down before the break, so we'll kind of see what happens with Urson, but I think at least for the Flyers, 61 points, you're still 8 points out of a playoff spot. They're not going into, the last stretch with, I don't think, fans being that optimistic based on what happened. But I would preface, right, like they had a couple of stretches this season where they played really well. So I wouldn't be surprised after a long break to see them come back and play well, even though they, went into the break playing pretty poorly. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see them come out of the break playing strong. And I think a lot of those games that they had in a short condensed period of time did not let this team have the adequate practice time, and that's for all teams. But I think when it's a young team like they are, I think that is a factor, right? Like you're not practicing, new system this season. Tocchet's obviously wanted to implement certain things. We're seeing their defensive coverages break down a bit, and that was kind of a cause of so many goals against over the past couple weeks before the break. So I think you factor all those things in together, and I just think like you get some more of that practice time in, a bit of this break to kind of recharge the batteries. I wouldn't be surprised to see them play decently, at least out of the break, versus what they were doing beforehand, right?
Yeah, I think your instincts are probably right. Like I don't expect a full collapse when they get back. Maybe
Definitely
the
not.
maybe
Yeah.
the opposite. But I will say, considering how much you and I have talked about 2026, I don't think the Flyers falling in the standings going into this offseason is the worst thing ever.
No,
This
you
is
still get a pretty good draft pick,
it's a
right?
strong draft with lots of defenders, and the top players in this draft are wingers. That means the meaty like area where they're kind of sitting right now is mostly centers and defensemen. So
Positions of need, yeah.
yes. So again, there's a silver lining to every situation. So we will cover that more as we get closer. Anything else, Vasili, before we end this?
Yeah, just everybody check out flyersnittygritty.com. Tons of great content has been going up throughout the Olympic break just on all the Flyers that have
Yep.
been participating. So shout out to Jamie for all that he does with Flyers Nitty Gritty.
Of
But
course.
yeah, thanks everybody, just for listening over this break. Obviously a little bit of a slow period in terms of Flyers news, but still wanted to give you this episode. So
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you everybody for listening. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for notifications to get notified when we release these episodes. And for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes. Give us a rating and a follow there if you can. Again, that is the best way to support this show. If you could do that right now, please, please, we humbly appreciate it. And we appreciate it because we're going to keep coming with content every week. Also, shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. Shout out to Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for your insurance adjustment needs. They will help facilitate the process between you and your insurance company and make sure you get the best claim possible. And shout out to sportspider.com. They are our partners. They aggregate sports content from all over the internet, Flyers, NHL, everything like that. And again, the link to them is both in the audio and video version of this podcast, and that's sportspider.com. And also, like Vasili said, make sure to always go to flyersnittygritty.com. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you. We love you. And remember, always stay